Julie had always been a woman of quiet reflection. Her world was simple, built on small joys and the comfort of daily routines. Her life was peaceful, at least, it had been until she met Johnson. It was a chance encounter, the kind that changes everything, even if you don't realize it at first. Johnson was a man of contradictions. He was tall and broad, with a sharp, angular face that could appear intimidating at first glance. But his eyes, the deep brown eyes, spoke of sadness, a kind of melancholy that Julie couldn't ignore. They were eyes that had seen pain, perhaps even inflicted it, but most certainly endured it. They were eyes that reflected the weariness of the world, like a mirror to her own soul. Their first meeting had been at a coffee shop, a place where Julie often went to escape the noise of her thoughts. Johnson had walked in that day, and for some reason, Julie felt an instant connection, as if their paths were meant to cross. It wasn't anything dramatic or overt. It was simply the way the gazes met, how their worlds collided in that one shared moment. Their conversations began with small talk, the kind of casual exchanges that happen between two strangers trying to make sense of each other. But over time, those conversations deepened, as if they were peeling away layers of armor to expose the raw, fragile parts of themselves. Julie spoke of her childhood, of her family, her dreams, and her fears. Johnson listened, his gaze soft and attentive, but his words were often few. He spoke little of his past, always deflecting questions with a change of subject or a quick smile that never quite reached his eyes. But Julie, with her quiet persistence, didn't push him. She could sense that there was something heavy in him, something he wasn't ready to share. She respected that, for she, too, had her own burdens, things she carried silently within her. It wasn't long before their connection deepened into something more. What had started as friendship soon blossomed into a delicate, tentative romance. It wasn't the fiery passion that movies often portrayed. No, it was a slow, steady burn, a kind of warmth that wrapped around them gently, like the embrace of a familiar, warm blanket. It was soft, comforting, but not without its own pain. Julie had never been one to rush into relationships. She believed in taking her time, letting love unfold naturally. But with Johnson, it was different. She felt an urgency, a need to be close to him in ways she couldn't explain. His presence made her feel safe, but it also made her heart ache. She could sense his walls, his reluctance to open up fully, but she also saw the vulnerability in him, the tenderness that he tried so hard to hide. As their relationship grew, Julie began to notice the small signs of struggle that lingered beneath the surface of their connection. It wasn't the fighting or the disagreements that troubled her. No, it was something quieter, something more subtle. Johnson would withdraw into himself, retreating behind his walls whenever things got too close, too real. Julie would reach for him, wanting to comfort him, but he would pull away, not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't bear to show his true self. One night, as they sat together in the dim light of Julie's apartment, Johnson spoke of his past for the first time. His voice was low, almost a whisper, and his eyes were distant as he recalled memories that seemed to haunt him. "I was never good enough for her," he said, his words heavy with regret. "I tried, but I never measured up. She left me, for someone else." Julie didn't ask for the details, didn't push him for answers. She could hear the pain in his voice, the weight of rejection that he still carried. She wanted to tell him that it wasn't true, that he was more than enough, but she held her tongue, knowing that words alone could never heal the wounds of his past. For a while, they were silent, each lost in their own thoughts. And then, almost as if the words had been building up inside her, Julie spoke. "Johnson, do you love me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with expectation. Julie could feel her heart beating faster as she waited for his response. It wasn't the first time she had asked him, but it was the first time she had said it with such certainty. She needed to know, needed to hear him say the words that had been lingering in her own heart. Johnson's eyes softened, and he looked at her with a tenderness that she hadn't seen before. "I do," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I just don't know how to show it." Julie reached for his hand, holding it gently in her own. "You don't have to know everything," she said. "You just have to be here, with me." It was in that moment that Julie understood the truth of their relationship. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. Their love wasn't the kind that was made of grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It was the kind of love that lived in the quiet moments, the shared silences, the unspoken understanding, the way they held each other when words weren't enough. As time passed, Julie and Johnson found their way together, though not without struggles. There were moments of doubt, times when their connection felt fragile, as if it might shatter at any moment. But despite the difficulties, They continued to build their relationship, one small step at a time. They leaned on each other, even when it felt like the weight of the world was too much to bear. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, Johnson turned to Julie with a look that she had never seen before. It was a look of vulnerability, of fear, and of something else, something she couldn't quite name. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Julie looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is it?" Johnson took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something difficult. Will you sign the sex contract?" Julie blinked in confusion. "The what?" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question he was about to ask. "It's a agreement, a contract between two people, where you promise to be with them, physically, emotionally. It's not about love, it's about commitment. It's about a promise." Julie's mind raced. She didn't understand. A contract, a promise. It seemed so cold, so mechanical. But as she looked into Johnson's eyes, she saw the desperation there, the need for something that was more than just words, more than just feelings. "Why do you need this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Johnson looked away, his gaze distant. "I need to know that I'm not going to lose you, that you'll be there for me. I don't know how to trust anyone completely, Julie. But with this, maybe I can. Maybe this is how I can give myself to you fully." Julie felt a wave of sadness wash over her. She understood now. Johnson was offering her something that he had never been able to give before, his trust. But he was also asking for something in return. A contract, a promise of physical and emotional connection, a bond that went beyond words, beyond love. In that moment, Julie realized the sacrifice he was making, and the sacrifice that she, too, would have to make. It wasn't about the contract itself, but about the depth of commitment it represented. It was about giving everything, heart, body, and soul, knowing that it might not always be enough, that the pain and the struggles would remain. But it was also about the power of embrace, of holding on to each other even when the world threatened to pull them apart. "I'll sign it," she said quietly, her voice filled with a kind of sadness that only those who had truly loved could understand. "But only if we promise to be honest with each other, to never hide from the truth, no matter how hard it is." Johnson looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and something else, something that might have been love, or perhaps hope. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "We'll be honest," he said, his voice steady now. "I promise." And in that moment, Julie understood. Love wasn't about contracts or promises written on paper. It was about the quiet moments, the shared silences, the way two people could hold each other through the pain and the struggles. It was about sacrifice, and the power of embrace, and the willingness to give everything, even when everything felt broken. As they sat together in the dim light, Julie knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Not because of a contract, but because of the bond they had created, the love they had nurtured through the cracks of their pasts. And in that moment, with Johnson by her side, she felt as though she had everything she needed to face the world.